For those who fear that such global freedom of movement would open up the gates for a gigantic wave of global immigration from poor to rich countries, I would say that their fears are ill-founded. Just as national borders are indeed successful today at preventing such immigration, the divisions they create between national legal systems are even more successful at preventing national tax authorities from getting their hands on the wealth of the world's super-rich. And a world federation, in contrast, whose tax authority would span every corner of the planet, there will be a gigantic wave of redistribution, not only of political, but also of financial power from the global super-rich to the global super-poor. In such a global mixed economy or welfare state, the global poor will suddenly be able to make a decent living in local jobs, providing necessary services and infrastructures to their own communities. Having that option, it is clear that the vast majority will remain in their homelands with their loved ones rather than tear themselves from their families, friends and cultures, as so many are forced to do today. Coming back to the narrower question of Israel and Palestine, some people insist and rephrase their question as follows: though a world federation is a noble vision to aspire to in the long run, they say, in the meantime the Palestinians are suffering enormously from atrocious injustices and cannot wait for global democracy to emerge. The colonialist project of Zionism continues to deprive them of their basic human rights in flagrant violation of international law, and it is our moral duty to help and protect them first. To explain the flaws in that argument, it is useful to start with a simple analogy. Imagine an armed group that bursts into a conference hall and takes all the attendants as hostages. In our domestic national systems, we know it would take much less than 50 minutes before the place would be surrounded with police cars and special forces coming to liberate the captives. Yet in our anarchic international system, Palestinians can live under occupation for well over 50 years and no police force are rushing to help them. The lesson of this analogy is that while our natural reaction to Israel's occupation is to condemn Israel and Zionism, the more basic problem is with the international system that has no real mechanisms for protecting victims and restoring justice. For this reason, anyone who really cares for humans in general, and the Palestinians in particular, cannot ignore this aspect of the problem or postpone it until after the conflict has been resolved. This systemic problem can be addressed and must be addressed as a precondition, or at least alongside any effort to find a local or particular solution. Yet today it is mostly ignored. Whether one thinks that the conflict should end by dividing the land into two nation-states or by turning it into one democratic state, one must recognize the necessity of an external authority equipped with sufficient force and democratic legitimacy to intervene when necessary to enforce such a solution and protect it. In the current international order, such authority does not exist, and it will surely not just emerge if we continue to postpone the discussion about it. The United Nations clearly does not possess the necessary power for such intervention, as the budget of Israel's Ministry of Defense alone is several times bigger than the combined budget of all the UN agencies. As the UN does not have any state power and cannot collect taxes from of the global rich and their corporations, it is completely dependent on the voluntary contributions of the richer member governments, who give very little. But more importantly, the UN does not possess the democratic legitimacy to intervene, as rather than belonging democratically to the world's nations, it belongs exclusively to the governments who rule over them. It is this characteristic of the UN, more than anything else, which shows the greatest weakness of the movement for Palestinian independence. In today's world, there is nothing really unique about the fact that they are oppressed by a government that does not represent them. Openly oppressive governments are perfectly standard, both legally and normatively, in the current international order. One does not need to look far beyond Israel-Palestine to see this plague extending over most countries in the Middle East, across much of Africa and much of Asia.